Our friends at Anbernic are back at it again with the RG Rotate, which honestly, kind of the most hyped I've been since the original RG35XX SP, which of course recreated the lovely SP aesthetic. But there's just something about this thing that's just really fun, and I've been playing with it a lot, so here is the top 10-ish tips that I figured out to help you get the most out of your RG Rotate. So let's dive right in. If you're new here, hey, I'm Coulter. On this channel we cover retro handhelds, newer handhelds, weird PC builds, janky tech things like putting a Wii in an office chair like we did recently. So if that sounds like you, be sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss the future, rather eclectic videos that I like to do here. So in my opinion, the RG Rotate is a pretty unique handheld from Anbernic. Obviously they make a lot of handhelds like the SP and the many others since then. And yes, part of that is because they finally did something a little bit different and actually created a cool new design that's more pocketable and has a really fun addictive mechanism. Like the RG slide was neat, but the rotation is just really satisfying, and the whole, square touchscreen display thing is quite nice. But another reason I think this handheld is unique that I don't think gets talked about as much is because it's the rare budget Android retro handheld, in that, yes, it's a little bit of an underpowered Android handheld at a 2 GHz CPU, a Mali G52 GPU, and only 3 gigs of RAM, but the price also reflects the specs, and in this current economy, this handheld only costing about $86 right now is actually kind of wild, because you'll see a little later in this video what you're actually able to push out of this thing with a few of the tips here, to where I've been spending a surprising amount of my free time gaming on this guy, even though I have more capable devices around the house. And so tip number 1 is going to be the best N64 performance settings on here. So out of the box, if you go ahead and hit select here on the RA launcher here, we'll see it's going to use Movement 64 Plus FC Pro. So it's going to break out into the separate Movement 64 Plus emulator, which is good. Launching into a dedicated app will tend to give us better performance, unless it's really easy to emulate like PS1 or earlier. But unfortunately, Movement 64 Plus does not come very well pre-configured, and so what we need to do is actually exit out of the game, and we need to launch into the emulator directly. So what we'll do is we'll hold down the little RG button here on the side, and that'll launch us into the main home launcher. Go to the emulators folder, and launch M64 Plus directly. And this will come up a few times in this video, but it's a very good idea to launch directly into the emulators at least once, so that it can prompt you for permissions here and there, especially in Android 12 or 13 and above, so that it has the proper permissions to read and write from your SD card, but also to configure key settings like this. And so once we're in the app itself without a ROM loaded, we can go over to Profiles, select Profiles, and what I found to be the best is under Emulation Profile, changing it from, I believe it's Glide 64 Accurate is set by default. We're going to slide down to Rice Accurate, and similar to on the Linux-based Android handhelds, I found the best success with the N64 Rice video settings, and we'll show how well that runs in a second. But while we're in here, we'll go into tip number 2, which is how to properly map the N64 controller to this layout, because there are enough buttons to map to everything on the N64, it's just a weird layout, and unfortunately didn't come very well pre-configured, at least in my experience. And so what you're going to want to do is go over to Profiles and Controller. You're going to create a new profile, call it something, call it yo. And yeah, with the square screen, sometimes the keyboard just takes up a ton of space, but using the D-pad to navigate down to your OK button, very helpful. Little hot tip there. That one's for free. And then in here, I'm going to start tapping on buttons and saying, okay, that's my up, that's my down, that's my right, that's my left. And as for the C and A and B buttons, the layout that I found made the most sense to my brain when I actually play a game is to let B be Y, and A be B. That way it's kind of where the buttons are on the N64 controller. Then have C up be X, C down be A, that's your up and down, and then C left and right can be your inner triggers here, your L2 and your R2. And then L and D-pad, we're just gonna drop those completely. Almost no games used them because almost no one held that side of the controller. So we're gonna make Z be our left bumper and right be our right bumper. Then we'll go here and we'll exit that. And then we'll go back to the screen we're at before, using our handy little back button if you want. And we'll go select profiles, and then under controller 1 profile, you'll choose the one you just made. So in my case, I'll set yo as my profile, and we're good to go. And so now, when we go back into our RG launcher, we just hold that button again to bring the RG launcher back. We open, say, good old Donkey Kong 64, and if you just start pressing a key here and there, it should fade away the overlay. Yeah, there it goes. That's another thing you probably have to turn off on each individual emulator is turning off the overlay. And it appears I mapped my up button incorrectly, because I can only go down right now, so that's neat. So just going down here and not turning around, we can see that Donkey Kong is running very smoothly around the screen here. We're swimming, we're jumping, we're diving. all that good stuff. So that's the best config I've come up with for running N64. You can run N64 in RetroArch as well. And there are some games where this still isn't perfect, like playing Mario Tennis. It does some pretty wild frame buffer tricks. And I think the only way I got it running like visually perfect is using software emulation, which worked, but the Rice Accurate seemed to be the smoothest performance. Like everything's really nice, smooth FPS. While for the most part, graphics are correct. And I was happy enough with that. Real quick, big shout out to this video sponsor, Huanuo, and their Flowlift Pro arms. My previous desk setup was rather messy, as you can see here, and I was really excited when Huanuo sent these over so I could get my monitors up and out of the way and create a lot more desk space for themselves. And to my delight, they were very easy to set up. They had multiple mounting options, both clamp and through the desk. The monitors were super easy to attach as you just put the plate on the monitor and then they just click into place on each arm. There's excellent cable management built in and all that good stuff, but one of the most important things is that you'll notice my monitors don't move. They don't sag or anything, and that's because Huanuo has this really cool mecha spring mechanism. So instead of it relying on a gas arm like a lot of other monitor arms, you just turn the little dial here with the Allen key and you'll see the little yellow indicator ring sliding up and down, letting you know how much tension is applied in that spring. And so you can accurately calibrate the monitor arm for however heavy of a monitor you're using on each arm. And in my case, these were not light, and so once tuned, these have not sagged at all throughout my workday, which is wonderful. And of course, I still have full range of motion where I can tilt, swivel, and reposition super easily either of these monitors. And now with that old monitorizer out of the way, I have a ton of real estate available on my desk again, which is wonderful. Prime Day is coming up, and you can get up to 50% off the Huanuo Flowlift Pro Dual Arm for a final price of around $30. So check out the link in the description, and thank you so much to Huanuo for sponsoring this video. Back in the RG launcher here for tip number 3. Yes, the RG launcher isn't for everyone, and we're actually going to cover a really good alternative a little later on. But if you want to stick with stock, a few hot tips here. In the main screen, you'll want to hit select, and that's where you can get to all the handy stuff, like going into settings. You can actually change the theme style. So by default, it'll ship looking like this guy here with the big blobbies. And that's fine, but I find it to be a lot of clicking, and I'm not really a fan of just all the colors flashing around. Whereas I really like theme 3 here, which gives me more at a glance and these nice little controller icons. I quite like that. And another really handy tip is when you're inside of a console, say Super Nintendo here, you go and hit select, and then in here is where you can change the emulator that it's going to launch. So it can either launch the RetroArch SNES core, or it can launch directly SNES 9X like the app itself, or other cores, so that's super handy, telling it what it's actually supposed to launch for that game. And then you can also go to ROM settings, and here's where you can tell it where the actual ROM folder is for that console. So if your folder is named something other than SNES, this is where you go to change that and tell it to start scanning for your games there. And of course, if you change your ROMs a ton and you want to scan the whole library, you can go down to Tools and go ahead and say scan ROM on TF card, and it'll scan everything through, which is super helpful. Tip number 4, doubling down on what I said earlier, is it is really important when you're going to start playing a new app-based emulator, such as say PPSSPP, that you open it directly from some kind of launcher, not just via RG launcher exclusively, because I've already done it here, but when you first open it, it'll prompt you with something like this saying, hey, where should I store all the PSP data? And you'll say, oh, I'll choose one that I already have. And you say, okay. And then you can actually just go into the internal storage PSP folder that Anbernic already set up, and it already kind of includes some settings that are handy to get your PSP up and going here. But without that, you'll launch games and you won't be able to save any fake memory stick duo files or do save states or anything. So it kind of breaks the game if you don't open the app directly at least once to go through those prompts and make Android happy. But once you do that, then you can go through the launcher and open PSP games just like you want to. And that applies to 3DS emulators like Azahar or Citra, really any app-based emulator. And speaking of 3DS, that brings us to tip number 5, which is the most ideal 3DS emulation settings. And honestly, I didn't expect to be emulating much past N64 and PS1 on this guy, but you'll see what we're able to push out in a second. But one of those was 3DS, and after doing these steps, I got it running surprisingly really well, where I got it running at a buttery 60 FPS and have been playing a lot of 3DS on this thing actually in the last weekend here. So Citra here comes pre-installed and is the only emulator launch option from the RG launcher, and it works pretty well, but I did have some issues and actually like a bit of crashing here and there, and I just wasn't really satisfied with Citra. And so that's what led me to try out Azahar here, which I've heard of, but never had a chance to actually try it out properly. But it runs exceptionally well, especially once you make sure that your graphic settings are set to Vulkan. You enable asynchronous shader compilation to help it get a little more speed here, because we don't really mind if it's a little graphically glitchy here and there. And of course, make sure that your D-pad is mapped to only the circle pad and not to the C stick or D-pad, so you don't get any confusing control schemes. But yeah, as you can see here, I've really had no issues rocking 3DS emulation on this guy which is super surprising given like, yeah, it's only got 3 gigs of RAM. The Mali GPU isn't usually something that you're, all that pumped about for higher end emulation. Like I got a bit of a stutter just a second there. Like Ocarina of Time so far has been the heaviest, but after I've run around an area for a second and it's had, it's a couple of stutters, Navi is freaking out. It's like, you're not doing the objective. But yeah, now this area is loaded in, like we got like a locked 30. I'm just running around playing Ocarina of Time on a frickin' little like, what feels like a credit card of a device. Okay, I thought that looked cooler when I closed it and it would just keep playing there, but never mind. Flipping it down does technically lock the screen and that can pause your emulation, but that's my recommendation for the most ideal 3DS emulation settings on here. And yeah, getting a smooth 30 or 60 depending on the game has been wonderful on here. And I've definitely been low-key playing a lot of Star Fox 64 3D, because as cool as the Switch 2 one looks, I'm kind of already really happy with this remaster and it fits in this tiny little device. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna play that. Sorry, Nintendo. But like I mentioned before, if you're in the RG launcher, you actually don't have an option to point 3DS at Azahar here. It's just Citra. And so that's what led me down the rabbit trail of figuring out, what is the best square aspect ratio launcher for the RG Rotate to replace the RG launcher? And that's when I came across this open source one called Dijisho, which first off, huge shout out, is definitely meant to replace the RG launcher in that you can go to Android settings, handheld game console settings, quick launcher, and change that to Dijisho. And so now when I switch myself into RG mode here, we are now in Dijisho instead of the RG launcher. And already you can tell why I very quickly fell in love with Dijisho. Just look at the art. This is the stock art. I love it. It brings all the feels. It's got wonderful little UI and UX decisions, like show me my battery percentage and Wi-Fi up here, my time and my platforms along the bottom. And then if you flip through, you have, some widgets you can set up, your full-on apps launcher, so it completely replaces your Android launcher, and of course your settings. This is just exactly the kind of launcher that I was hoping to find. And so we're gonna go through really rapid fire how to set up Dijisho here on the RG Rotate. But if you want like a super deep dive on Dijisho itself, let me know in the comments, because I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about there. So first off, it'll prompt you for what platforms you want, and you'll choose, between the massive list. This is all hosted on their GitHub. You check off all the boxes you want and hit import. And that imports the config so that Dijisho knows how to handle those kinds of systems, what ROMs to look for, what emulators to look for, etc. Then over under library for each console, you hit the little pencil icon to open the edit screen for each console, and you'll scroll down to player settings. And so player just means emulator. And so in this case, you'll just drop it down and you'll choose what emulator you want to use for each platform. And in my case, I just went through each one to match what the RG launcher was using, except for when I wanted something different. So for 3DS, I of course chose Azahar. That was the whole reason I went down this rabbit trail. But for others like Dreamcast, I just chose Dreamcast, RetroArch 64, Flycast, which is exactly what the RG launcher was using. So you'll go through and you'll set your preferred emulator for each one. And then for each one, you also click on paths here and you'll add the path to your emulator folder. And no, there's no way to automatically point it at all the folders you were using in the RG launcher, but I kind of prefer this because it is quite a pain to remember, like, okay, were they looking for the folder called Genesis, or did they call it Mega Drive, or did they just call it like GN or something? And so this way you just point it at exactly the folder you want, wherever it is, then just hit sync, and then it'll import those into its own little database and also try to scrape art for it too if they're named, half decently enough. As you can see in here, a lot of these are not named very well, but hey, look at that. We got a few showing artwork. That's perfect. Then after you set the emulators and the ROM paths for each of the platforms, to solve a few annoyances, we'll go into the settings here. We'll go to appearance, and at the very bottom, we're gonna enable portrait mode, because if you don't do that, it's going to always open Dijisho and then rotate into position, because this is technically in a landscape mode right now, because when it's open, it's technically on its side, this display. And so we wanna have portrait mode on, because then it will not freak out as much when we open the launcher every single time. And then under settings library, we'll want to check this box that says disable player warning, so that every time you open a ROM, it doesn't warn you that it's going to need to kill the old process to open the new one. This way we'll just trust ourselves that we hit save before we close the app. And lastly, the part that I put an unusual amount of effort into was how to get the RG launcher, like bezels and configurations and all that, to show up even though you're launching them through Dijisho now. And see, you have these like pretty bezels here and all that. And because of this unusual perfect 1-to-1 square screen here, I really wanted to keep the whole setup that they'd figured out here with these pretty little, top and bottom artwork and everything. I don't know. I really like bezels, so I wanted to keep these. And what I figured out is that when you launch a game through the RG launcher, it's actually passing a custom global RetroArch config file that houses all the settings and configs for RetroArch customized to each platform. And so what I had to do then is for any platform that's going to launch into RetroArch, I needed to go down into Library, Inspect Players, and then go down to each RetroArch build. So for example, Dreamcast RetroArch 64, the version of RetroArch we're using, and then the core, open that, and I actually had to edit this -e config file line here. And so before, it was pointed at the default global RetroArch config, but the one that Anbernic made is actually hiding in files config DC for Dreamcast, Flycast libretro android.so, and then retroarch.config. And I had to sniff all that out while having this guy connected to my computer, and I used ADB terminal commands to extract all that data out of there. But once I had that data, all I had to do was just backspace this line and paste it for each emulator. You know, you do about 10 times, but you do it once and then it's done, which is super nice. I figure I'll probably compile those config lines and a few instructions into a blog post and link it. So if I haven't done that yet by the time this video is out, definitely harass me in the comments so that I can get that together. So I would love to save you that headache and help you enjoy those bezels from a more flexible and polished launcher here. And the last Dijisho thing is, so you don't lose all that work, you might want to connect your Google account to the backup function here so you can back up all your settings and everything. As far as I know, that will keep all the configs in place so that if you ever want to restore them, you can just one-click restore and you won't have to do all that manual setup again. It'll just be super plug and play, which is awesome. What are we on now? Tips like 6 or 7? I don't know, that was a huge tip. We'll call this tip 6.5. We're really losing the track here. But one of the key things you're gonna wanna do is, because we're sane people, we want to have dark mode available to us. And so it won't be there at first. You do need to drag the dark theme tile up into the Android Quick Launcher here. And then, so that you won't have the white every time you're in an app or something, you can just press dark theme, and then all the apps that support it, which is most of them, will show up in dark mode to match everything else. So that's a really quick one. Another cool quick one is if we go to Dijisho here and go to the top, you can access system settings really easily. And if you go down to wallpaper and style, I bet you didn't know, you might have been wondering when you saw mine, that you actually have multiple clocks available on the lock screen. So if you go down to lock clock, you can choose between one of these 4 clock faces, which is super cool. So that's the stock one. This is like the kind of Avengers looking one that I change it to. And yeah, you've got this Rolex looking one here, and then this guy. So yeah, a few different flavors for all of your things you savers. I don't know what that means, whatever. Tip number 8, for using it like an MP3 player, I'm happy to confirm that Spotify does indeed work totally fine on this guy, and is honestly very pleasant to see with this little square screen like this. It feels like a proper little MP3 player. Like, yes, I know they didn't include a headphone jack, they have the USB-C, and I feel like they probably should have included a USB-C to 1/8" adapter to make up for that. But I suppose at the end of the day, a lot of us aren't proper audiophiles. We're probably just gonna connect Bluetooth headphones to these anyway, and that little adapter is probably like $1 on AliExpress. But yeah, Spotify works great, and if you wanna stream your own music, I'm actually cooking up something right now. It's not released yet, but if you go over to cozy.media, it's actually a brand new self-hosted media player to compete with the other solutions out there that I don't really like. And it's for both streaming music and for video. So it's gonna be a whole complete end-to-end solution. So if you wanna hop on the waitlist for that, check out cozy.media, and yeah, you'll get alerted as things unfold over the next few months or so. Also, as far as using this as an MP3 player, I found it much more natural to turn on gesture navigation instead of the 3 buttons at the top. So as you can see, if I hold here, that's my task switcher. You can see what I mean by the rotation thing there. And if you swipe from the side there, that's the back button. I just find that much more natural on this form factor, but to each their own. If you like the 3 buttons at the bottom, you can use that too. But finally, we're getting into the last 2 tips that I've saved for last because they are the big kahunas. Tip number 9 is getting GameCube running on this thing. That's right, ladies and germs. That's right, ladies and germs. GameCube runs in this little chipset, and like surprisingly well, actually. We'll throw up a little, Super Monkey Ball 2 while we explain how that works. And yeah, here we have Super Monkey Ball 2 rocking at 60 FPS on this thing. Like, what in the world? Vibrations working. We're cruising around. This version of the game is so much better than the versions that came out for the Switch because they messed up the party games, like my beloved Monkey Target here. Played many an hour of this with my dad and brother. Oh gosh, yeah, physics. Oh no, I've lost altitude. Sorry, buddy, gotta call it quits. But yeah, as you can see, we're running this inside not regular Dolphin, but MMJR2, I think technically. And that's of course with the good old Vulkan backend and all that good stuff. However, on this chipset, it's not gonna be across the board working beautifully. Like Mario Kart Double Dash does run super well, but on this chipset, there are some graphical glitches where you'll see me boot into a race here in a second, but the alpha blending layer kind of stays sitting in front of everything instead of blending into the background like it's supposed to. And so you have this permanent haze that makes the game not the most fun to play, but you can tell by the menus, this thing's ripping, But as soon as we get into here, Luigi's Circuit looks great, and then we start to play, looks great. The blue hasn't fallen yet. Oh, that's right. So it's running slow because I did some manual game overrides to this thing because it wasn't running well. So yeah, this is how well you can get Mario Kart to run using OpenGL. So when in doubt, you can use OpenGL and just do a bunch of little tweaks and hacks to try and eke out as much performance as you can. And honestly, this is still quite playable. Like, I'm rocking this at 52 FPS right now. I think I might even have this like overclocked a bit to try and, yeah, it's at 150% speed. So this is definitely not the most like, you know, tournament proper training for Mario Kart Double Dash, but you're playing Double Dash on the go, and that's pretty impressive. So yeah, this is not with Vulkan backend. That would have the perma haze. This is with OpenGL. And of course, not only will you be limited on your games by which ones have graphical glitches on this chipset with Vulkan, but also by which ones might require you to use, you know, the D-pad or the C-stick, because we don't have enough buttons for that unless you like pair a Bluetooth controller or something. This is Wind Waker running on the Vulkan back end. You can see we're getting about 22 to 24 FPS here, which obviously isn't the most ideal. But on the other hand, this is Wind Waker running on this tiny little handheld. Like, that's another reason I think this handheld is so special. I think this is the smallest, or maybe one of the smallest Android handhelds that Anbernic has put out. And I'm just so impressed. Is like, this little thing is very pocketable, and yet I can play like a decent bit of my GameCube library in this thing on top of a bunch of other consoles, on top of like really weirdly smooth 3DS. Like, you can call this the 3DS Micro and I'd be happy. So just, yeah, if you can get over the frame rate being a little bit lower than you'd like and just kind of focus on the fact that, you know, you can enjoy the story of the game on a really pocketable form factor, still super impressive. Like, I'm just generally blown away by the fact I can do this, and ignoring the fact that I cannot cycle the map over here because I don't have a D-pad. So, you know, give and take. But finally, hot tip number 10, which that really worked out unless I messed up the numbers somewhere along the way, is PS2 emulation. And it actually runs pretty okay. If you're gonna rock 2D games, like, you know, Mega Man X8 or something, you should be pretty dang good to go. However, I was able to get Burnout Revenge for the PS2 running on here, which is very important so that we can
smoke weed and fill our bellies with diet soda and play Burnout Revenge for the PS2.
Now, if you want to steal my config that I used to set this up, you can really super slow-mo what I'm about to do here, just flipping through these many settings. Notable ones include the EE cycle rate, the EE cycle skip. I messed with the graphic settings. This is actually running at 0.75 native resolution. Messed with some stuff there. The audio is desynced and muted. But I mean, you know what? We're playing Burnout Revenge for the PS2 on this little thing, which just feels ridiculous. And the numbers are really small, but it looks like we're running at about either 22 or 44 FPS. One of those two. But yeah, you can see it looks kind of like a jacked up Game Boy Advance game, but honestly, I just did a takedown. Like, it's, I don't care. I'm running Burnout Revenge on this little tiny rotatable handheld thing. Oh my goodness, I'm flying. I love this game so much. I mean, yeah, look at that. I just stopped talking for like a solid 10, 20 seconds because I'm just playing Burnout Revenge now. Like, if 2026 is the year of anything, it's to learn to enjoy good games on cheaper hardware. I think that is a very important lesson for 2026. Now, granted, if you don't want to be, you know, slightly bit crushing a PS2 game to run PS2 on this guy, especially given that you're missing like a number of key controls to run a lot of PS2 games, you'd probably more prefer playing, say, its cousin game, Burnout Legends on PSP, which you can actually upscale 3x, which is like 720p on this guy. Like, let's see, make sure we're set there. Yep, 3x rocking Vulkan here. And yeah, look at this. We're at a locked 30 FPS at 3x 720p resolution, which I think is about as high a resolution as it makes sense to push on this screen. And we're cruising. Yeah, whether it's PSP or PS2. I made the mistake of starting another Burnout game. Oh, I missed the target. No! We got him. We got him. Yeah, there we go. Gold, baby. But those are my top 10 hot tips for getting the most out of the RG Rotate. Again, honestly, a kind of came out of nowhere handheld that I super love. As far as some bonus notes like battery life, yes, the 2000 milliamp hour battery doesn't sound like much, but so far I've gotten a solid, 30 3-4 hours. Like, it depends on how you're playing. If you're playing a lot of higher end PS2, GameCube 3DS, that'll of course render it faster. But if you're rocking some GBA and your display is not that bright, you're playing at night, you're using the, here's a nice little bonus tip, but if you're playing at night, Eye Comfort Shield, great feature. I wish the Switch had it. It does not. So take notes, Nintendo. But yeah, we've been rocking on this thing for what, like an hour or so, and he's still at 86%. So I haven't been bothered by the battery life. And very lovely, it's an Anbernic Android handheld, not an Anbernic Linux handheld, which those tend to take a while to charge and require an A to C cable. These you can use a C to C cable. I plug it into like a laptop charger and it's charged in like under an hour. So much faster charge time on these guys, which is super handy. There's more little nuggets I could say. I've like talked about these swappable bumpers and the SD card slots and all those little things. I'm sure those things are well covered, but the purpose of this video was to give you very punchy, hot tips for how you'll actually want to use this if you buy one or bought one, which is usually all I care about in a video. So if you found this video helpful, would super appreciate if you considered subscribing or leaving a like and a comment down below. Really help out the video. I'd much appreciate it. And if you like this video, you'll probably want to check out the video where I checked out the RG Slide, which is a similar cool form factor handheld from Anbernic. So I'll see you guys over there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.